If you are traveling to a Mindanao-based city like Davao, Cagayan de Oro, General Santos, Dipolog, Butuan, or Pagadian, and would like to know the travel requirements that you have to prepare, then this video is for you. Please watch the whole video to know more about the travel requirement details. Welcome to DenZ TV. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you receive updates as they are posted. This video will explain all the travel document requirements that you need to prepare if you are traveling via Philippine Airlines, Cebu Pacific Air, or AirAsia going to these cities: Butuan, Cagayan de Oro, General Santos, Cotabato, Davao, Pagadian, OZAMIS, Zamboanga, and Dipolog City. Let's start with Butuan City and the requirements coming from Cebu Pacific Air. All guests from Metro Manila, Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal and bound for Butuan are required to present a negative RT-PCR swab test result or a negative antigen test result. The test must be conducted within 5 days before departure, and infants who are 2 years old below are exempted from this requirement. Let's proceed to the requirements from Philippine Airlines for passengers going to Butuan City. So, mandatory quarantine in the LGU quarantine or isolation facility shall be required for persons with positive test results and travelers who exhibit symptoms upon arrival at the city of Butuan. All persons with travel history from highly urbanized cities of NCR, the municipality of Pateros, and the provinces of Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna, and Rizal must also present negative RT-PCR or a rapid antigen test result conducted within 5 days before departure from the point of origin. Still from Philippine Airlines, notwithstanding a negative RT-PCR or rapid antigen test result, all persons with travel history from outside Caraga and or persons showing any signs and symptoms of COVID-19 shall be subjected to mandatory testing and quarantine protocols. As a local health protocol, all persons from outside Caraga region with negative RT-PCR test or antigen test result must be subjected to repeat testing within 5 days upon arrival in Butuan City. Passengers arriving in Butuan City shall be required to present valid IDs and provide information relative to their travel history and shall be checked for signs and symptoms of COVID-19 in accordance with the protocols and guidelines issued by the Department of Health. For government appoors flying with Philippine Airlines to Butuan City, these are the requirements: identification card, travel order, travel itinerary, and they must pass the symptom screening at ports of entry and exit. Now, let us proceed to the requirements for Cagayan de Oro City. From Cebu Pacific Air, you need to accomplish the following. Register to the following websites: SPass, OpCourse, StaySafe.ph, and Higala app. Don't worry, I'll be posting all the links in the video description below. Guests bound for cities and municipalities outside Cagayan de Oro City are only required to register in SPass. All arriving passengers must pass symptom screening upon arrival. So, as you can see here, there is no RT-PCR test requirement for passengers entering Cagayan de Oro City. All inbound passengers going to Cagayan de Oro City via Philippine Airlines must register to SPass or Safe, Swift, Smart Passage, and generate the travel permit. Also, you have to register to StaySafe.ph, a contact tracing system, and register to OpCourse or online pre-arrival coordination system and generate a confirmation letter. And lastly, register to Higala app or Higala contact tracing QR codes as mandated in the city. So this is the same with what is required also in Cebu Pacific Air. And as I've said, the links to these websites will be provided in the video description below. For requirements coming from AirAsia, we have here for returning residents, you have to prepare the SPass permit to travel, stay safe contact tracing, the CDO barangay coordination letter, the QR code from Higala app, and the coordination with the barangay of destination. So this is for returning residents or locally stranded individuals going to Cagayan de Oro City via AirAsia. For returning overseas Filipinos going to Cagayan de Oro City via AirAsia, these are your requirements. S-Pass, stay safe, barangay coordination letter, a QR code from Higala app, and coordination with the barangay of destination. For AirAsia passengers traveling to CDO who are authorized persons outside of residence or APUR, these are the requirements: S-Pass, stay safe, CDO barangay coordination letter, QR code from Higala app, coordinate with the barangay of destination, and a travel order or proof of business and work transaction in CDO. Let's go ahead to the requirements for General Santos City via Cebu Pacific Air. A negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test result issued within 72 hours before the date of arrival. So this has changed already, because before, Gensan was accepting antigen test results. But right now, it appears that only swab and saliva tests are acceptable. Pre-registration in Tapat at least 24 hours before your flight. For APORs from national government agencies, you have to provide valid ID, travel order, and travel itinerary. If you are traveling to General Santos City via Philippine Airlines as an APOR, these are your requirements: ID card or proof of identity, certificate of employment, travel order or travel itinerary, and a negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test result issued within 72 hours taken from accredited DOH facilities. If you are a returning resident traveling via Philippine Airlines going to Gensan, these are the requirements: ID cards showing residency or any other proof of residency in Gensan, and a negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test result issued within 72 hours taken from accredited DOH facilities. So for saliva, it should be taken from the Philippine Red Cross only. For AirAsia travelers going to Gensan, if you are an LSI or returning resident, you have to prepare a negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test conducted 72 hours from accredited DOH testing facilities, tapat QR code, pass the symptom screening upon arrival, and undergo mandatory quarantine upon arrival for 7 days in the barangay isolation units. If you are traveling via AirAsia as an APOR, these are the requirements: negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test, company travel order, valid government ID, travel itinerary, tapat QR code, and you have to pass the symptom screening test upon arrival. If you are traveling via AirAsia as an ROF or returning overseas Filipino and overseas Filipino workers, these are the requirements: negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test conducted 72 hours before departure, tapat QR code, and you have to undergo mandatory quarantine upon arrival for 7 days in the barangay isolation units. Now let's go to the travel requirements for Cotabato City from Cebu Pacific Air. If you are a locally stranded individual or LSI and returning overseas Filipino or ROF going to Cotabato City, you have to prepare a negative RT-PCR swab test result conducted within 72 hours prior entry into the city, even if you are vaccinated. Infants below 2 years old are exempted from this requirement, and you have to also provide a letter of acceptance from the barangay or city government and undergo a 14-day quarantine upon arrival. For Cebu Pacific Air passengers who are APORs, these are the requirements: valid ID, travel order, and travel itinerary. And you have to also present a negative RT-PCR swab test result conducted within 72 hours prior entry into the city. For Philippine Airlines, non-Apors are required to present a negative RT-PCR test result, a letter of acceptance issued by the CDRRMO after confirmation by the barangay where such passenger shall reside, and a mandatory 14-day quarantine upon assessment of authorized medical personnel. If you are an Apor traveling via Philippine Airlines to Cotabato City, these are the requirements: negative RT-PCR test result valid within 72 hours, ID card, travel order, and travel itinerary. Now let's go to the travel requirements for passengers going to Davao City via Cebu Pacific Air. All Davao-bound guests are required to submit the following requirements: negative RT-PCR swab test or negative saliva RT-PCR test conducted within 72 hours before the flight. Children below 12 years old are exempted from this requirement. And you have to issue also provide a valid government ID and a safe Davao QR code. If you are traveling via Cebu Pacific Air to Davao City and you have tested positive for COVID-19 and have completed the quarantine period, present the Bureau of Quarantine Clearance, a copy of the RT-PCR test result, a notarized doctor certificate of good health and fit to travel, and a clinical summary if you were hospitalized. If you are traveling to Davao City via Philippine Airlines, you have to prepare a negative RT-PCR test result or negative saliva test result. Children aged 12 years old and below are exempted from this requirement, but you have to have still a valid safe Davao QR code and a valid ID. For Apors, these are the requirements: negative RT-PCR result or negative saliva test result, pass a symptom screening upon arrival, valid safe Davao QR, company office ID or government ID, and a travel order. If you are traveling via AirAsia, these are the requirements for returning residents: negative RT-PCR or negative RT-PCR saliva, valid ID, and valid safe Davao QR. Still, for AirAsia, if you are a returning overseas Filipino or returning overseas Filipino worker, negative RT-PCR swab test or negative RT-PCR saliva test, valid ID, and a valid safe Davao QR. Still for AirAsia, if you are an Apor, present a negative RT-PCR swab or negative RT-PCR saliva test, valid ID, and a valid safe Davao QR. Let's proceed to Pagadian City via Cebu Pacific Air. Guests flying to the province of Zamboanga del Sur are required to present the following travel documents upon check-in: your S-Pass, Travel Management System, a travel coordination permit, a negative RT-PCR swab test result valid within 5 days before the travel, only for guests coming from areas in ECQ. So I guess since there's no more ECQ now, then this requirement is no longer needed. For Apors traveling via Cebu Pacific Air, we have the valid ID or company ID, travel order, and if you're a resident of Pagadian City, you are no longer required to present any travel requirements as long as your valid ID states that you are a resident within the city. If you are traveling via Philippine Airlines, all non-Apors or LSIs are required to be swabbed for RT-PCR test upon entry into the city regardless of the quarantine status of the place of origin. So there is a test upon arrival situation here. The swabbing will be held at the Pagadian City Airport for travelers who enter the city by plane and at the City Isolation Center in Barangay Santa Maria, Pagadian City for those who are entering the city by land. So there is a free testing upon arrival. Still under Philippine Airlines, for passengers going to Pagadian City, if you are an Apor who enters the city regularly, like those who work in offices at the regional center, travelers who deliver essential cargoes regularly, members of the police and military, and government workers, are exempted from the RT-PCR test requirement. Now let's go to the requirements for OZAMIZ City via Cebu Pacific Air. For APORs, valid ID, travel order, and travel itinerary. All other guests, such as locally stranded individuals, ROFs, are not required to present travel document requirements upon check-in. However, if you are coming from Manila, Cebu City, Cebu Province, and other COVID-19 hotspots, you are required to undergo a rapid antigen test upon arrival, which is for free. But if you don't want to be delayed by this, you can submit your own negative RT-PCR test result valid for 48 hours upon arrival. If you are traveling to OZAMIZ City via Philippine Airlines, you have to make sure that you register to SPAS and staysafe.ph. No mandatory RT-PCR negative result requirement. But there is a mandatory rapid antigen testing if you are coming from these places: Metro Manila, Cebu City, Cebu Province, and any other COVID hotspot. The test should be done upon arrival and it shall be free of charge. Now let's go to the travel document requirements for Zamboanga City from Cebu Pacific Air. If you are an LSI and you are just transiting, okay, passing by Zamboanga City, present your valid ID, a negative RT-PCR swab test result, or a negative saliva RT-PCR test result. Travel coordination permit or TCP from SPAS. If you are traveling via Cebu Pacific Air as an APOR to Zamboanga City, please present either a company ID or a government-issued ID, a negative RT-PCR swab test result, or a negative saliva RT-PCR test result, and a travel coordination permit or TCP from SPAS. If you are doing an indispensable travel, you have to issue a government-issued ID, a negative RT-PCR swab test result, or a saliva test result, a negative. You have to pass symptom screening, a referral from doctor or hospital in Zamboanga City if you are traveling for medical reasons, a death certificate if you are traveling or attending for a funeral, and a TCP from SPAS. If you are traveling via Cebu Pacific Air still as a student or a reviewee returning to Zamboanga, you have to show proof of transaction from the college or university, a negative RT-PCR swab test result or a negative saliva test result, and a TCP from SPAS. For AirAsia requirements, a returning resident should present a negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test result, a government-issued ID or company-issued ID, approved travel coordination permit via SPAS. Still from AirAsia, as an APOR, a government APOR to be specific, valid ID issued by your respective government agency, original or certified true copy of travel authority or travel order, and an approved TCP via SPAS. For AirAsia travelers to Zamboanga City who are APORs, private APORs to be specific, present a negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test result, a company-issued ID, original or certified true copy of travel authority or travel order issued by your office, and an approved TCP via SPAS. Still from AirAsia, if you are an APOR coming home for rest, recreation, so this is not for official travel, you have to present again a negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test result, any government-issued or company-issued ID, and an approved travel coordination permit or TCP via SPAS. If you are traveling via AirAsia as a returning overseas Filipino worker, negative RT-PCR swab test or saliva test result, valid ID, and approved TCP from or via SPAS. If you are traveling via AirAsia as a student and reviewee returning to Zamboanga City, negative RT-PCR swab or saliva test result, proof of transaction from the college or university, and approved TCP from or via SPAS. Now let's go to DIPOLOG City. Via Cebu Pacific Air, these are the travel requirements. For LSIs and persons with indispensable travel, medical, and humanitarian purposes, these are the requirements you need to prepare. Negative RT-PCR swab test result, valid within 5 days. Valid ID, certificate of coordination from concerned city or municipal LGU or LGU of destination, and letter of acceptance from concerned city or LGU of destination. Still in SEBPAC for ROFs. Negative RT-PCR swab test result, quarantine certification issued by the DOH Bureau of Quarantine, valid ID, and certificate of coordination from concerned city or LGU of destination. If you are traveling to DIPOLOG City via Cebu Pacific Air as an APUR, please present your agency or company ID, travel itinerary, deployment or travel order issued by the concerned head of office, negative RT-PCR swab test result, valid within 5 days, and certificate of coordination from LGU of destination. And lastly, for DIPOLOG City via Cebu Pacific Air, all persons allowed entry into the province of Zamboanga del Norte are required to download and register in the Stay Safe app and fill up the PIATF declaration form upon arrival. And these are the requirements for going to different cities and municipalities in Mindanao via Philippine Airlines, AirAsia, or Cebu Pacific Air. Please take note of those requirements. You can always rewind and pause so you can take note of the requirements for each of those cities discussed. Thank you so much for watching. If you find the content of this channel valuable, remember to subscribe. Feel free to check out the other videos as well.